Hello, Internet, and welcome back to another episode of Meet La Prensa. Viewer, if you like the interviews you're seeing here, if you find value here, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. So our guest today is another very special guest. She's actually a Latina who has had recently, who wrote a piece recently about some trouble she's had in her newsroom. Now, we've talked so far on Meet La Prensa about two other Latina journalists who have had trouble in their newsroom. The first was Mariana Atencio, who, when she came down here to Washington for the White House Correspondents' Dinner a few years ago, she was told by somebody, an unnamed person at 30 Rock, that she was not to look too Latina. The second was just last week, as Stephanie Mendez told us a story about how Univision colluded with the employee union in her newsroom to leverage her DACA status to dismiss her from her job. Now, this is really troubling. There's a lot of really troubling things going on in the news business, especially when it comes to Latinas, who are the least paid. They're the lowest paid workers, not just in the American news business, but in the American economy. So thank you, Lori Lizarraga, for coming on Meet La Prensa. We are so honored to have you on. Thank you for your fight, and thank you for your testimonial in Westworld. For the viewers who haven't read it yet, you can find a link to it right here in the description of this video. But Lori, walk us through just sort of broadly what happened at News 9 in Denver, Colorado.
Pablo, thank you so much for having me on and for reaching out to me and just for reading the piece. I am so encouraged to see how many people have picked up Westword, be it, in person or online, and decided to read all the way to the end of my piece. I didn't expect that kind of engagement, so I'm really, really honored by that, and I appreciate you doing the same. What happened at Channel 9 is what happens to a lot of journalists of color in American newsrooms all over the country, unfortunately. What happened was I was hired as a young Latina journalist to come in and what I thought was use my people skills, use my lived and shared experiences with my community, and use my care for what's going on in our communities of both Black and Brown issues, business owners, and incredible just stories that come out of our communities on a daily basis. I thought I was hired to do that kind of work, and I think to an extent I very much was. With a cap on it, with bumpers. And I guess if I had been okay with getting, hired there to be the journalist who did tell the stories with bumpers on, then I would have lasted and I think I would have been okay. But I wasn't hired to create change. And I thought I was around to improve the ways that we went into our communities and more consistently, more comprehensively told their stories, and gave them a more well-rounded platform on our station. And unfortunately, I was just met with a lot of adversity and sort of, I guess, people saying, rock the boat less, and you'll do well here. And I think that that's the case for a lot of, like I said, journalists of color who come in and want to have their lived experiences create more value to them. And we believe it holds value in us, but we're just not also being met with that same perception of what we bring to the table.
So you didn't need training wheels, and yet training wheels were pushed upon you, it sounds like. Can you tell us the first time, and I know you mentioned this in your article, but just for the viewer, like the first time you realized that News 9, right, that they were trying to put training wheels on your reporting, which is excellent, by the way. If you go to Lori's Twitter, scroll down on the media column, and you will find a lot of stand-ups that she's done there. My favorite of yours, honestly, is your shout-out to the postal workers on Christmas Eve. Brilliant stuff. There's empathy there. There's enthusiasm there. I mean, you were assigned to stand out in the snow on Christmas Eve, and yet there was this warmth, brightness, and like I'm saying, empathy for the people who actually had to work that day to get you your presents. So when was it that you first realized, when you started at News 9, that all of a sudden, this talent of yours is being questioned, perspective is sort of being applied, like you say, bumpers or training wheels?
Pablo, I wrote about it in the piece, like you said. It came up about 2 weeks into working at Channel 9. in terms of language that we were permitted or not permitted to use. In the case of 9 News, the guidelines up until very recently, right after the piece came out, is my understanding, the guidelines for speaking of undocumented immigrants, refugees, people here in the country without citizenship, was to refer to them as in the country illegally or here illegally. There were all kinds of reasons why the station cited that those were the guidelines, and I had an email, in fact, that showed that they had decided to stick to their guns on those guidelines even after AP changed their direction in 2013. 9 News decided they were going to move forward, saying that we should say in the country illegally when speaking of undocumented immigrants. And in doing a story on a high school student, I pitched the story. It's hard enough getting the stories out the door. You have to have buy-in from your managers. You have to have buy-in from producers. Somebody has to want to put the story you're talking about in their show. So it's important just from the outset that you have that buy-in. I was told, go do the story, talk to him. I was in my second week at the station and did the interview with the 17-year-old who was quite nervous about doing this story. And I have found in my experience with reporting that tends to be the case with a lot of people who we ask to do stories surrounding immigration law, their status. It's a very complicated issue, and it does put a lot of people at risk if they are going to publicly speak about their status if they're undocumented. So he was brave enough to share with us his story about the challenges of getting into college as an undocumented student in the States, being brought here when he was just a baby, no choice of his own, and grew up knowing no other country but America and no other state but Colorado. And we did the interview. He was great, told him up and down that I would be sensitive and make sure that I was careful and honor his story because he did trust me to do that. And I promised I would. And we get back to the newsroom and we're coming up on deadline. I mean, this is within hours of the story airing, maybe 2 hours. Deadlines approach very quickly, and I'm writing the script and I get managers, to take a look at it. And that began the first, I don't want to say argument, but certainly standoff about this issue. And it would be the first of many conversations that we would have, that I asked for more sensitivity, for a look, for updated guidance about how we should be referring to our undocumented community. And I was told at one point in that first conversation, you know who you should talk to about guidance on this? You should go talk to one of our white anchors, because he is just a grammar guru and he will be able to help you better understand why this is actually the more appropriate and respectful way to refer to them when you're saying undocumented. It's not sweeping enough. We need to say in the country illegally. And they were referring me to somebody else whose lived experience this is not, but whose, grammar knowledge was supposed to be, comprehensive enough to make me better understand the experiences of my family and my community. And like I said, Pablo, that would be the first of many conversations where I encouraged us taking a look back on how we could potentially change things to improve them and make them more sensitive for our communities. And it was a conversation that would happen my very last week at 9 News 2 years later. And the policy was still exactly the same.
So it sounds to me like this conversation the initial conversation ended at an impasse that continued as an impasse until your final day at News 9. Is there anything that you might have done, or looking back, knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would tell Lori 2 years ago about maybe how, and again, I would never encourage anybody to fight less in this situation. I think I admire you so much for bringing the fight, not just for yourself and your story, but for the undocumented community. Did this anchor that they sent you to the grammarian, did he speak Spanish? Like, you know what I mean? Like, does he know the cleaning lady in the newsroom's name? Like, you know what I mean? Like, does he know anything about being Latina? You know what I mean? So I guess, like, in retrospect, looking back at it, if you could get Lori and just take her aside on her first day at News 9, right, what would you tell her? When you came in thinking that you were going to be this change agent, that you were going to be a transformational correspondent on air for them, right? Like, what would you tell her specifically, if anything, about fighting for your story?
That's a great question, Pablo. And I thought many times over the course of the 2 years, why didn't anyone tell me that it would be like this coming here? Why wasn't I more prepared? Why didn't I know? Why did I hear one version of what this experience would be like in this newsroom and get dealt a completely different hand? And not only that, this is a shared experience that I'm having in this newsroom. So not only is it unique to me, but it's happening to all my peers of color. Why didn't anyone let us know it would be like this? And I guess I had a bit of resentment at times for the people of color before me who let it get the way it did. And I think more than anything, I would tell 2 years ago me not to harbor that resentment, not to be bitter about who did what before you. This is a hard battle, Pablo, to take on, to risk what we risked to speak out. It's not easy. And there were so many times before the piece came out that I considered not writing it, not doing it, not publishing it. It is so difficult, and the risks we take in doing this are so real. And the industry is not friendly to this kind of whistleblowing. So I would tell myself to be more gracious, I think, because in knowing now what it takes to speak out, I realize why so many people were not able or willing before me to do what I'm doing today. To be gracious to the fight, and to be fair that everybody has to self-preserve at the end of the day. And people have families to provide for, roofs to keep over their heads, a salary and insurance that they need. And it would, it's just not fair to put this fight on other people, but it's a hill I'm willing to die on. And I'm really, really grateful for that in me. But I think I would put it on people less and take responsibility for it more and faster. Because once I stopped blaming other people for the circumstances that I walked into, I got more to work in the newsroom with what I could do. And I felt like that's important.
We face a bit of a challenge as Latinos in the news business, and this is one of the reasons why we launched this channel to begin with, that there is no unapologetic enforcer for us in the news business. Like, who do we turn to? Who do we do? Like, who can help us? So I guess one of the reasons why we launched this channel is because, Lori, just so you know, and this is something we told Stephanie too on her segment, like, if you ever have anybody messing with you in that way or anything like that, and you want somebody to have your side, that's what we're here for. Call Meet La Prensa. We have your back 100%. I want to ask you real quick about a specific detail of your piece. We asked Sonia Gutierrez to come on. She was unable to come on, but you mentioned in your piece that she was required to call out on air her immigration status. I've been curious about that ever since. We asked Sonia if she had a clip of that or something like that she could provide. What does that even sound like? Like, what is, like, how do you present the story? I'm Sonia Gutierrez, immigrant, like, it's covering immigrant. What is that? How does that work?
I would say that I don't have, and I've seen comments from viewers who actually said that they remember it happening. What I'll tell you, Pablo, is that it really, more than anything, than it happening often, deterred Sony from even wanting to pursue immigration coverage or pursue the stories of her community, because of that stipulation in allowing her to do those stories. So I can't even tell you exactly what that would have sounded like, because I know from my relationship with Sonia that more than anything, it just put her off from coverage that she is so capable and probably the best candidate to cover. Is the complexities of immigration and the families who that represents and the people who are involved in trying to, overcome what Sony has overcome. And I think that they would sort of tote it out when it was good and when there was progress in immigration law, but then use it sort of against her in other ways. So I couldn't even tell you, honestly, Pablo, what that would have sounded like, because I think more than anything, like myself included, these different verbiage requirements really mostly just made us stop pursuing the coverage of the communities we care the most about. And I've already had reporters at the station who are sort of filling the shoes for Kristen, Sonia, and myself, who have said, I also pursue immigration coverage less because of that requirement to refer to them as in the country illegally, because it's hard enough to get this community to share their stories, for the Latino community to establish trust with a news platform like Channel 9. So if you're going to go the extra mile to then have to tell them, trust me, let me gain your trust and tell you that this platform can help you and that you should use it to tell your story, but I'm also going to say that you're in the country illegally, and every time I refer to you, that's why I'm going to speak about you. you're fighting a losing battle that you don't want to win, because you don't want to have to speak about them in this way. So yeah, for a lot of us, it really did just mean less immigration coverage, which is certainly not what we wanted or what that community deserves.
So your story went live last week. Walk us through what the reaction has been. So what were your expectations? Well, actually, first of all, let's walk us through what your decision-making process was when you were like, you know what, I'm out. The decision at News 9 is final, right? But I have two choices here. I can walk away with my tail between my legs, or I can take a stand, right? And when you made that decision, what outcome were you seeking, and what outcome did you end up? What has been the reaction so far?
I mean, I will say, in leaving 9, contracts don't get renewed all the time. It happens. People decide, the organization and the, whoever it may be, that it's time to part ways. So, I wouldn't have necessarily had to leave with my tail between my legs. I was hurt that I had done so much in the community, and still the scales were not weighing in my favor as far as what my value was to the newsroom. And I was very disappointed for the progress I was making in the communities that I represent. And now they wouldn't have someone who could look out for them and tell their stories in the newsroom. I didn't even really have allies who I looked around the newsroom when I was leaving to say, yes, I trust you, take my contacts. It was really difficult to leave my community sort of at that place where we had just gotten started with the progress of telling their stories. So I wouldn't have had to necessarily announce that the agreement was, a decision essentially that wasn't my own. Like I did at my last market, I did not have a job set up when I left Bakersfield, California, my market before Denver. I ended my contract and said, I'm going to pursue larger opportunities. And from there, posted about when I had an opportunity, when I had it, like 2 months later, I wanted to come home and spend time with my family. So there's a world where I'd say nothing, and all it is 2 successful years, and I chalk it up to, on to the next opportunity, bigger and better, and I really could have just let it be that. And I considered it, because it would have been easier. But I'll tell you, Pablo, when did I decide I'm going to say something? I knew 2 years ago that I would say something. I didn't know in what capacity I would say something, but I knew that I would. I started keeping receipts and writing things down. I was on calls with my family often about where to put my receipts, how to send them, how to make sure that I was being safe and careful, but also documenting what I saw was going on. I was very aware that there were things that were red flags going on under my nose. And when it got closer to my contract being up on March 5th, I did waver, I will say, at times, because it got closer and saying something became more and more real as every single day passed. And I asked a lot of people in the industry and my peers what their recommendations were, if they had advice. And pretty much all of them said, don't do this. Don't do this. You have a career. You've started in this industry. You're burning bridges with your professional, journalism career if you do this potentially. And you'll be a risk, you'll be a liability. So make sure if you do this that it may be the ultimate risk you take, and it may make you sacrifice the future of your journalism career. And I knew all of that, but it's one thing to know it, and then one thing to be a month out from your contract and sort of approaching the time to start really writing this and this becoming reality. I'll say I went home for my sister's birthday exactly a month before my contract was up. And I told my sister, who has a new baby, she was up at midnight when my flight landed with the baby. And I was like, oh, thank goodness you're awake. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I'm so nervous. I'm getting so much advice saying not to do this. And she said, of course, you're going to do this. You've always known you're going to say something. You're nervous because it's approaching, but that you wouldn't be able to live with yourself if you didn't say something. And from there, the conversation was no longer about if I'm going to say something, it was how and where and when. And that was it that night, that she reminded me who I am and what I've always said I stand for, which is truth. And that truth is worth any risk. someone who's known me my whole life, just reminding me like, si se puede, you're so strong and you know that this is worth it. And from there, yeah, the conversation was just about where do we do this and what are the right things to say so that this resonates with people who are fans of Nine News and who have also experienced this personally, either from being my colleagues, at present, or from being former, journalists and, employees in the newsroom. So that's really, from there, that's really what took, the rest of my attention, was the best way to do it, to make sure that I was being fair and honest and tactful. And yeah, I came out, I think, like 3 weeks after I was done at the station. What was I expecting, Pablo? Nothing.
Well, can I just say real quick? Your sister was right. Your sister was right. You're absolutely, honestly, if every Latina we're talking to had the same fight if every Latina in the news business had the same fight as Mariana, as Stephanie, as you, Latinos will get paid. They would be protecting each other. You wouldn't have to rely on anybody, right? You would have that solidarity. So I think that like the more when people call you in the future and are like, oh my God, same thing's happening to me. You know what I mean? Don't doubt yourselves. Your piece is brilliant. Your coverage is brilliant. You on air right here is brilliant. I wish that I was Joe Scarborough or Anderson Cooper or something like that, giving you a platform that you deserve to tell this story, right? And maybe we will be someday soon. But what's the reaction?
Don't hide up, meet La Prensa. This is where it starts, Pablo. Vamos.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so what has the reaction been? You make the decision, like you sit down with your sister. Your sister's known your whole life, says, Lori, you know what you're gonna do. Why are you even asking me this question? You know what I mean? And you're like, all right, let's do it. So you write the essay. I assume you probably had to talk to Sonia and Kristen a little bit to like kind of like or whatever. And then you went with it, and then boom. Next thing we know, it's popping up in like every journalism chat in America. And what's the reaction been like from your perspective?
That's still just crazy, even hearing that you say that, that it had that kind of traction, because I'm still just totally floored by the reaction and the engagement. It's been amazing and completely unexpected. Of course, I spoke to Kristen. Of course, I spoke to Sonia. I spoke to so many other people currently employed at Nine, formerly employed at Nine, community members. And I'll tell you, Pablo, this fight is not just difficult for journalists who have come through Nine News or come through any journalism organization. It was hard for community members to want to get on with their names being named in the piece. So many offered their contributions to how this ripple effect has gone, so far. I wanted to show that with those sources. So many offered their contributions anonymously, but would not put their names on it. And I think the piece was slated to have ultimately 7 people in it at the end of the day. And the 2 weeks leading up to it coming out, I had lost people one by one. And again, that was a very challenging part of putting the story out there, because I was also helping in finding my courage to help others find theirs and to help convince them or assure them that this was going to be worth it, that speaking out was the right thing to do, that they even had a story to tell. There are so many times where you've gone through this enough that you don't even know if what has happened to you is worth talking about or if it's even surprising anymore. So just reminding people that their stories really are so worth expanding on and letting other people know about. But as I said, I lost most of the sources by the end of the piece being published. And that's not to say that the people who are included were not exactly all that it needed, because it was perfect with them. But that is to say that this is a very shared challenge when it comes to speaking out and speaking your truth. That's not limited to just us in the newsroom and talking about our former employer, but really anyone who's been affected by anything. It's very difficult to hold truth to power, even when you get the opportunity and you know that it's right. So when the piece came out, what was I expecting? I more than anything, I told myself to anticipate and to be okay with it really getting no traction. I told myself that all of the sleepless nights and all of the fear and the tears and the energy that went into creating that piece and deciding to do it, and then methodically agonizing over every sentence and period and, paragraph. I mean, I really did. I put so much care into every single thought that went into that. And I did tell myself, be okay with just moving the ball up the hill, and this being the start of something bigger, this being what empowers someone behind you to also share their truth, and letting it be a springboard for what could come down the road. Be okay with this not producing the change you'd like to see. Just be proud of it being part of, a bigger story. So I was really more preparing myself for the possibility of it really amounting to nothing and very few people reading it. And I woke up Sunday and I hadn't even posted about it yet or anything. And I was checking my email, seeing if it had gone live, and it had, and I was already getting tweets about it and already getting DM'd about it. And I hadn't even, posted it anywhere. People are tagging me. So from there, I mean, Sunday was like the most overwhelming. And every day since then, it's just been a shock to see people interacting with this piece, responding to me, offering their support, saying that they come alongside me. I mean, since then, it's amounted to companies incorporating it into their diversity, equity, and inclusion training, making it required reading at other, other news organizations, talking now to companies who would like to hear me sort of figure out a way to put the piece into a presentation so that I can impart that wisdom with companies and their employees.
A Netflix series. You know what I'm saying?
But it's nice. It's nice to see that what I hoped would be an opportunity for learning for those who are ready to take it as that, it has been. And while it has also been met with defensiveness and with, a level of skepticism, for those who are ready to learn from it, they're taking it and doing exactly that.
So I think that the most recent development I've seen on the internet so far of this story is that I think that the National Association of Hispanic Journalists met with some diversity flack at the parent company for News 9. Plus, I mean, from as an outsider perspective, what looks like some token Latino got dragged along to the meeting, right? You're talking about pushing the ball up the hill, right? And of course, like the challenge when you push a boulder up a hill is not getting run over when you run out of breath. So my question is, like, what do you see as the summit of that hill in terms of impact? Because like I've said before, it's like Westworld piece is brilliant, but to me, I think of it, it's like, this belonged in the New York Times media blog. This belonged in, The Guardian or something like that, you know what I mean? And this segment belongs on Chris Hayes tonight on MSNBC, or like I'm saying, like Anderson Cooper or something like that, you know what I mean? So that, to me, and I'm not trying to like mansplain it or something like that, but I'm saying like, what to you then in thinking about pushing this boulder up the hill, will you be satisfied that you're going to breach that summit that you're seeking and create this sort of avalanche of change on the other side of this mountain instead of just seeing the boulder come back and smash you to pieces?
I think it's already starting to do that. I think it's already starting to do that, in that it's encouraging other people to post even online, quote tweeting me or posting on their own in response to the piece, their own experiences of how this is so not a unique situation. And in the time that we're in, especially, organizations can no longer be permitted to operate like this. And I think just that it's empowering other people to share their stories is new to me in my, former newsroom, and new to see other people who used to be at the newsroom also then sharing their experiences. So I think that's one big thing is the more that people in their places, wherever they are across the country, feel like they are empowered, and not just empowered, but that they'll be well received when they come out and share these experiences. That's part of that avalanche effect, that I think the more of us who do it and are really well received by when we do it, the more of us will share, and the more, companies, organizations, news organizations will not be permitted or allowed anymore to get away with what they have been able to get away with for so long. So I think that's one big part of it, because I would have felt better in the weeks leading up to putting my piece out. If I had known that this was going to be this well received, I didn't, and that's not why I did it, but it helps to have this support. And so if this can be a reflection to someone else of what they might expect if they too decide to be courageous enough to share, then, you know, I think that that's already a big part of it. But what do I see as, you know, finally getting to the top of the hill? I mean, I don't know that you ever get there, right? That assumes that we have made it to the perfect world where everyone is receiving equal opportunity and fair treatment. And unfortunately, it seems like this is going to be a battle that goes on for, it's already been going on for too long, but you know, for too much longer, because of how many stories I have heard and how much this has resonated with so many people who have similar shared experiences. It shows that it is an absolute, you know, virus in our, you know, American workplaces. And so, you know, I don't know that I'll ever have a feeling of, okay, I'm done, I did my part, and now I can walk away from this. What I hope is that it does amount to larger conversations like this, that we do talk about the ways in companies, not just in news, but, you know, all over in professional industries in the country, what they can do to be more sensitive and more representative and elevate our communities, because they need us, and diversity is powerful and wonderful. And the more that we can help spread that message and help, you know, make it understood across the country, that's really when I feel like I'll be at a place where I'm quite happy with the outcome of this, because that's a bigger conversation that I'm very passionate about.
Well, here at Meet La Prensa, I think that I can speak for all of us when we say we want regime change at News 9 in Denver, Colorado. We want new management, period. I mean, the diversity flag, rolling out the diversity flag. Are you kidding me? Like, no, absolutely not. Like, this has to change completely. And everybody who told you that they were going to teach you how to be a Latina and a journalist, they need to stay in their lane. So since 1968, when data started being collected on Latinos in the news business, there's been no improvement to our plight. In fact, I think it's even gotten worse in many cases.
Yeah, I believe
the Kerner Committee, well, it's quantified. The Neiman Lab at Harvard has a report that started with the Kerner Commission when, you know, Black people basically burned several cities in protest over these horrific conditions in the summer of 1968. And President Johnson said, listen, we need to study this. We need to know what the heck happened. And they realized that media, like news media, just wasn't covering Black communities. They were sending white guys in to cover Black stories, you know. And it sounds to me like this is the classic case of, you know, white guys coming in to try and parachute their way into, like, the Latina experience, the Latino experience, the undocumented immigrants experience, something they don't know anything about. One of the big tests I always put on any newsroom is, what's your cleaning lady's name? And if you don't know it, well, I don't want to talk to you about your newsroom. You know what I mean? Get me an adult in the room who actually knows who works here. So
I won't put her on blast here, but I will say she did invite me and my boyfriend to go salsa dancing with her several times, and her husband. So definitely was good friends with her. Like I said, I won't put her on blast here, but for sure we were homies.
Thank you for that. Like that's encouraging to me, you know, because you got the fight and now you're becoming famous, and you're becoming famous whether you like it or not at this point. Like you push the ball up the hill. My question, I guess, for you would be like, at the end of the day, beyond starting a conversation, like, how do you define success in concrete terms? Like I'm saying, I would like to see whoever owns News 9 fired tomorrow and replaced with you or whoever you choose. And, you know, Tegna or whatever this company that owns the news company can cut its losses with News 9, because it should be a bigger and bigger and bigger headache until, you know, heads have to roll. So, but beyond that, you know, I'm thinking to myself, like, how do we make it so that the Latinas who are fighting for themselves already get that platform so that other Latinas and Latinos can see that actually fighting for yourself is how you get to the top of the business? I mean, not to name names, but we had David Artavia he's the editor-in-chief of Out Magazine on last night. And the gays, they know how to fight, and they know how to fight together. And in journalism, man, they're taking over. They just traveled the entire hemisphere finding LGBTQ plus sources in the sex trade from Venezuela who have HIV. It's the most specific story I've ever seen. They covered it in Peru. They covered it in Brazil. They covered it in Venezuela. They covered it in the United States. And it's amazing because all of a sudden it's just like you get a Latino editor-in-chief and the gay community says, yeah, man, well, if this is important to you, let's do it right. I'd like to see the Latino community come around your story, come around talent like yours, like obvious talent. I mean, oh my God, it's such an honor to have you on our air. That's how I would define success. It's like, okay, so Lori's next piece is in the New York Times. Lori's next segment after Meet La Prensa is on Morning Joe, right? Lori's next writing is with HarperCollins, right? Lori's next work is as a host on, I don't know, CNN or something, you know what I mean? Like, how do we define success when you take this huge risk on behalf of all of us? How do we define success for you as a community that backs you 100%?
Pablo, do you want to be my life coach? Because it seems like you have a lot of really good ideas for me. You know, I've been asked that a lot.
Just a template, you know, and again, I'm not trying to, I get really passionate about this because I feel like the challenge we're going to face as a channel at the end of the day is more and more people coming on to tell their story. But it's like, okay, like as long as we can define success, hell yeah. But we can't, I mean, I know what I would like to do. I would like to go on Morning Joe and write a book for HarperCollins and write in the New York Times. But what is it that you want to do? You know what I mean? Like, because I think about like this huge, everybody's telling you, don't do this, Lori. And you're like, no, I'm doing it. Okay. So what can we do for you? Like not we as Meet La Prensa, but we as the journalism business, like the news industry. What can we do for you to make sure that like, not only you're set up for the success that you want in your career, but so that you can be the example that other Latinas follow and everybody's giving them the wrong advice not to stand up for themselves.
Thank you so much for saying that. Encouragement like that, number one, is what makes me feel capable of doing something bigger than what I've done. And I didn't think that, you know, I would write this and that I would sort of get to walk away and fall into the shadows. I don't want that to be what happens. But in terms of figuring out what I want to do next, I have always wanted to have, you know, my own production company. I've always wanted to give us a platform, but not just us, because I don't want to segregate Latinos and our Black community and our white communities away from each other. The richness of diversity is when we come together and we give a little from everyone, and we understand that that's a beautiful and very necessary thing for us all to do. So I hope that in some capacity I can use this to springboard that opportunity. I thought I would sort of have more time in local news because I do love the impact that it has on community and how tangible the results can be. And I've seen that in the last 2 years, just how effective journalists can be for their communities when they're involved and when they care. So I don't know if another local news opportunity is the next best thing, or if sort of branching out and deciding that it's time to start something on my own to continue this mission is what's ahead of me. The piece has been out, like I said, for about a week. So in terms of getting my head around the next best opportunity, I guess the truth is I haven't, you know, gotten to a place where I know for sure what that looks like. But as long as the work entails advocacy and standing up for our community and making sure that we demand what we deserve and that we are better represented in every area, not in every newsroom, but not just in news, and in every single possible industry. It's really an ongoing decision that I'm trying to make here of how do we keep the ball, just like you said, Pablo, rolling in the right direction so that this energy doesn't get lost. And I realize that there is a lot of uphill battles. I mean, you're a person who's doing this, you know, yourself, of trying to get something off the ground independently, because you know that you have a different direction than perhaps, you know, some of the larger news organizations do.
And
so I don't know if
talent, the biggest talent on YouTube. Viewer, you got to subscribe to this channel. It's the best. Lloyd, we're running out of time. I hate to cut you off, but I got to ask two more questions, and we have we have 8 minutes, but first of all, where does your fight come from? Why journalism? How did these two things collide? Like, what made you choose to craft? Like, and you know, beyond being an incredibly talented producer, journalist, right? But a fighter. I mean, we ask everybody who comes on the show why they chose journalism. That's a packaged question that we'll probably put into a documentary someday. But more importantly, in your case, where does your fight come from? Because oh my God, it's awesome.
Thank you so much. I mean, journalism came because I wanted to tell stories, and I was accepted at my university for a business scholarship, and I was like miserable. So I put me through school, but I accidentally really just fell ass backwards into the journalism school. And from there was like, I didn't even know this was a career that someone could have. The journalism, though, that really became a part of me, and the journalist who I am today, that really, I grew into that part of me at my first market, and then definitely in Denver. The advocate part of it, the advocacy part of it, the effectiveness of it, the being the watchdog for the community, I didn't really learn that in school. And I don't know that enough journalism programs in universities are teaching the power that it has. It's not just about being, on TV or fulfilling a Disney Channel, dream that you never fulfilled as a child. I mean, we really have such an essential role in our communities. And I learned that on the job, really. So why journalism? I mean, it was a relief for me from a business program to find that the skills that were innate in me actually could make me money. Not very much, mind you, but enough to get by. And with that, I mean, what I found in journalism was all kinds of things in myself that I didn't even know I wanted to do or that I cared about, which was, advocating for the voiceless, giving people a platform who deserved it, making sure that we characterized the nature of our communities larger than just the crime they bring, but the business owners they are, and the richness of family and culture that they bring to every community that they're in. And so that really found me on the job, and I'm really proud of that. But I didn't go into it knowing that that was part of it, and I'm grateful that that's what I found.
So we agree, by the way, community organizing or something like it should be part of every journalism school's core curriculum, because watching journalists get picked off like flies who aren't like, all journalists is sad enough, but watching Latinas get discriminated against and mistreated in ways that we find unacceptable is something we're not going to tolerate ever, not with this channel, not with anything. So the last question is, I mean, in terms of community organizing, being something that I think we agree is important. Every community has its most underrated people in it. The people who do the work don't get the credit, don't get the recognition they deserve. So Lori, who are the most underrated workers in the American news business?
I mean, for me, Pablo, I thought about this a lot, of who would I sort of give a platform to, who would I call out? And I have to say, for this response with you today, that I have to call out and give props to Sonia Gutierrez and Kristen Aguirre. They came alongside the piece in the ways that they felt that they could, and have been so empowered ever since it came out. But really, those are two journalists who I came into my newsroom and felt so inspired by, watching them tell the stories that they did, watching them just powerhouse their way through a newsroom that is very intimidating. I don't know if a lot of people understand that if reporters don't pitch community stories won't be on air. And in order to pitch good, important community stories, you have to know your community. And that is something these two women, inside and out, had dove into and knew backwards, forwards, sideways, up, down. I mean, they are just so incredible, and they're getting a little bit of their due now, just having been mentioned in this piece. But I'm just excited to see where they'll go, where their careers will continue to go. I know that this has been a challenging experience for any of the three of us to overcome and to not feel sort of defined by. But in taking this time to speak out, I think what we've done is taken the last, years of our lives, and instead of feeling victimized, we feel powerful, and we feel like we are owning now those experiences and not letting anyone define it for us. Instead, we're doing that. And I think that that's who I would have to call out here, because I'm just so proud to see them become empowered over the last 2 weeks. They deserve that. And more than that, I'm excited to see where they'll go, because with this kind of encouragement, for myself included, we really do feel more capable every single time someone sends us a message that tells us, thank you for speaking out. I didn't know. I'll reconsider where I watch, where I get my news. And every single time that happens, I mean, it really is, it's a boost, and it's worth its weight in gold. So I'm excited to see what they'll do with that kind of empowerment.
Lori Lizarraga, thank you for your fight. Thank you for your piece of Westworld. I hope that anybody watching this who's wondering whether or not they should stand up for themselves, and everybody's telling them, no, don't stand up for yourself. Stand up for yourself. It's the right decision. We're in a moment, as the response to Lori's piece has shown. So I think that we'll leave it at that. We'd love to have you back on in the near future, and in any way, shape, or form that we can help you along the way, we are here for you. So viewer, if you like what you just saw, be sure to like and subscribe. You can find Lori's Twitter in the description for this video. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Meet La Prensa. That's a wrap.